Oh, welcome, right? To Avodas HaParsha in beautiful Ner Avram, in beautiful Shar Chesed Yerushalayim. Oh, good. We wouldn't want to be without it. Shevach of Shevach, right? And Shevach of Shul, Yerushalayim, etc. A beautiful place to come, learn, and daven. Okay, so as we're speaking of Deutsch here, before, when you get to Mishpatim, suddenly you have a huge amount of topics, a huge amount of halachas. Now, it's interesting, so I point out, right, that these tend to be interpersonal laws, right? Whether damages, financial things, and it's connected to the Aser Sadibra, so to speak, from the previous parsha with Ve'ele HaMishpatim, with that Vav, right? Just as those were given from Sinai, these are given from Sinai. That a person shouldn't make the mistake of saying, listen, every society has jurisprudence. Right, so the Jews have this one, but that's not, like Torah, like mitzvahs, like Arba Minim that only Jews do or something. So it's coming to teach you, that these things are special. Now it's interesting, the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach and the 7 Noahide laws, they're supposed to have a system of mishpat. Oh, no, you are perfectly on time. So one of the basic things a person is supposed to absorb from these things, and this is why sometimes they shift it. Traditionally, a lot of times when they start learning Mishnayos with children, and they'll learn from Bava Metzia, they'll learn from different things which involve honesty, not damaging, etc. Moshe Feinstein used to say that you have to get in from a very young age that not everything is mine, and to respect things that belong to other people. And it's really a high madrega, Chazal said, that you're careful with milei d'nezikin, meaning if you have as a motto in your life, I don't want to cause harm to anybody. I don't want to harm anyone. I don't want to cause harm to anyone, right? Not in terms of their psychology, in terms of their physical aspect, in terms of their possessions. That can get a person to a very high level when you have that.
The kids start learning in Mishnayos, in Batalis.
Yeah.
Learning what's mine, learning what's yours.
Right. And sometimes how it has to be decided. So, the Tolna Rebbe, I chose this piece because it was an interesting application of the laws of damages that we don't feel apply to us that often. Meaning the damages of the shore, right, of the ox. Right? Again, there are people who have oxen, right? Up in the Golan, I think there are people who have oxen.
They have jeeps also.
Yeah, they have jeeps. And electrified fences and such. But Reb Shlomo Zalman used to say, always when you learn something, try to apply it to your world, turn it into a car accident instead of, something that's described in a Mishnah. Take the principle and apply it to the world that's there. But here, in terms of the damages of the shore, it's also depending on machlosik in the Gemara, whether chatzi nezek is knas or not, whether Beis Din can even levy such fines which are there. But nonetheless, what we see here particularly is they're dealing with the psychology of the animal. Okay, the Torah is dealing with the psychology of the animal. And he points out, we all have what's called the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, right? The Tanya talks about that a lot. And dafka behema, not chaya, right? Behema, which is like an ox. So he wants to try to see a little bit parallels between what happens in defining the status of the ox and how we can learn about that for ourselves. The big differentiation in oxen is whether he's a tam or a muad. A tam means an ox that does something that is unnatural to him. Okay? For an ox to eat grass is not viewed as unnatural. Okay? That is viewed as muad, as something that is expected of him. A tam, to be nogeach, to gore a person or another animal, that's viewed as not normal. That's not a normal thing for the animal to do, right? And again, the Gemara goes into everything, even from, shor shalit stadion, right? The oxen that were bred for bullfighting, so to speak, and they were made aggressive, and they could have their own status. But here, the way they define it is, it says, if, right, the ki gach shuras isha, and then it tells us, so the first thing is, right, vames, if it kills someone, the ox itself is killed, right? And it's not eaten. But Baal Ashur Naki, the owner of the ox, is potter, because this was not something he could expect. He had his nice ox eating grass in his field. Somebody walked by and suddenly the ox kills him. But if ve'im shor nagochu mitmol shelshom, but if this is an ox who is gored from yesterday and the day before, v'hu ad bivolov, and there was testimony, right, which means in this case warning, that they came to the Bailam and they said, listen, this is a bad news ox you have to watch over him. And he didn't. Okay, so then both the ox is killed and the owner is killed. Now, how do we determine which is the tam and which is the muad? So in the Mishnah in Baba Kama, it says, Ezu tam ve'ezu muad. We have a machlokes here. The first shlita is kol shehi'idu bo shlosha yomim. It has to be on 3 separate days, right, that they came. They said, your ox gored, another day, etc. Then he has this status of muad. This is now an animal that is habitually goring. Now, can he regain his tam status? He can, right? So to speak, can the ox do tshuva, right? It's not so much getting the ox to change, but we can test and see whether that whatever possessed his nature is now gone and he's back to the status of a regular ox. So the first sheet is Rabbi Huda. He says, Mishe yachzor bo shlosha yomim. If he sees other oxen for 3 days and he doesn't gore them, so now the owner can relax. Now we can say, okay, he's back to being a regular ox, etc. Rabbi Meir said a muad is sheheidu bo shlosha pa'amim, that they warn the owner 3 times. It could even be on the same day. But the tam, he has a very interesting definition how the muad goes back to the status of a tam. He says, Kol shad yu atinokos memashmishin bo ve'eno nogeach, that little kids can play with him and he doesn't gore. What is it kind of playing? I read here in the Perush, moshchimoso, they pull him, masachkim bo, right? They're patting him, they're playing with him, and these things, right? And we go la halacha for that definition in terms of the shift back to tam. Okay, so it's an interesting type of thing. Now, the idea that these Nezikin represent things in our inner world of Ruchnis is something you find in the Baal Shem Tov, said that the 4 Avos Nezikin, right, the 4 major categories of Nezikin, which is the shor, the bor, hamav'eh, right, the animal that eats, v'hav'eh, and burning. So he says they all represent different forces of the Yetzer Hara, different damage the Yetzer Hara can do to us. Shor, the word shor also means to look or to see, right? There's a pasuk in the Ashurenu and v'lo karov. I see it from a distance. So that's the idea of you can cause damage by looking and by seeing. The bor, right? The bor on one hand means a pit, but a sadeh bor, a field which is bor, is a field which is left fallow, so to speak, that you're not doing anything with it. So he says that represents batola, a person who's not being productive. Person who's not doing anything. The bor in the Torah here is a bor. A bur is an ignoramus.
Right, of course.
Yeah. Oh, it's tebur. Okay, so he has the same letters, right? But that's right. So it's not doing anything. So, and that may be why he connects it to the idea of bur, a person who's not learning, also. Right, who's ignorant in terms of that. So that probably is why it's the same pronunciation. And maveh is someone that eats uncontrollably, wants to eat everything, wants to experience everything. Hahever, right, fire, this is kaas. This is anger that burns like fire. So that's just an example of the fact that it's legitimate to look at these things which have a very clear pshat explanation and be able to take them into the world of the Milchemes HaYetzer and how we deal with it. So he applies in this way. Sometimes he says you'll see in the world of education, there's a child, there's a student who's a real handful. He's like, and he's causing damage, and he's hurting, and he has to be punished, or he has to be removed, or something has to be done. He says many times, right, is nefesh habahamis, this animal soul inside of him, really wants that he'll get some attention and get some love, get some appreciation, feel that people value him. Right? So he says that anger which is inside is not always that this is, so to speak, damaged goods, this child, their person, whatever it is. And he says this is the idea of tinokos mamash mashinbo, meaning if you'll come, you pat him, so to speak. You treat him with love, you treat him with some attention. Many times, right, that can calm it down, that can change. It's even, there was a story, Chaim Nachman Bialik, right, the famous poet, he had learned in the Volozhin Yeshiva when he was young. And he had to be asked to leave, right? He had to be asked to leave. And as he was walking out to the train station, so Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who was on the staff at the time in Volozhin, so he walked with him, really with his arm around him. And the Talmidim were amazed, because he really didn't have that kind of relationship with the Talmidim, so to speak, at that point. And afterwards they asked, he's getting thrown out. He says, I told him, he has a lot of talent in writing, right? He says, please never write against the yeshivas. And he never did. He said, in fact, one of his most famous poems was Hamasmid, right? Where he wrote about, this fellow sitting and learning, and with a sense of admiration and longing almost, something like that. Again, he ended up very, very far from Torah observance, but the anger perhaps that he was likely to feel getting thrown out of yeshiva, or that was already being expressed by his behavior in yeshiva, was mitigated by that talk, by that one talk. So this little bit can make a very big change. The Nimukei Yosef, right, one of the Perushim in the back of the Gemara, Perush by the Rif, he says that it's enough for the children to play with the ox once, and he doesn't gore. He says that's enough to change, say the nature has changed. Okay, so that's a fascinating thing that we can find there. There was a story about a wedding. Yeshiva, Baron Schechter Zatzal, for a period of time, I learned in his yeshiva in Chaim Berlin. And this is a story that happened after I was in the yeshiva. They said that there was a wedding, and the chassan's parents were not observant. And the chassan's father was there, and he's sitting next to his son, and he just looks so angry and so upset. And he's just, So Rav noticed this. He says, come, can I speak to you? And they went off into a side room. They came out, right, smiling, laughing. He came in, he had a great time in the wedding. And they asked Rosh Yeshiva, what did you tell him? He said, I simply explained to him what was happening. In other words, what he would do, what his son would do, what I would do, right? What the chuppah is about, why the kala is going around. Nobody explained it to him. Do you realize how embarrassing and intimidating that is to be at your own son's wedding, and you feel like a total outsider? You feel that you're probably going to do something wrong because you don't know what you're doing. And he says that was all it took to defuse that anger. It's not that the person is essentially an angry person, but many times that anger comes in there because of something, and it can be affected. There's someone, he's a neighbor of mine in Givat Zev, Reb Shimon Russell. He's a very well-known speaker now, and he wrote a book about education. And he does these trainings for day schools in America a lot. He travels to America a lot. He said that, he threw out these numbers. He said, this is just in general, in schools in general, that, what did he say? 60% of boys enter the school day depressed. 60% of girls enter anxious, right? He said 20% really love it. 20% it's like beyond depressed or anxious, and they just are totally miserable. He says one thing can make a huge difference is how the first staff member that meets them in the morning greets them. He said if it's, this kind of scowl and, get to class or, pull up your socks or something like this, so it can set off the whole day wrong. If there's a smile, if there's a sense that we're glad that you're here, he says it can be an entire game changer. So this is the same principle that we're supposed to see from this shor. The shor is a behemoth, but a behemoth is not naturally one that goes on rampages, right? He's not a raging bull unless there are factors, right, that cause the bull to get angry that they talk about in the Gemara. I've heard actually that the idea of the red cloth isn't true. It's the motion of the cloth. It's not the color, right, that does it. So that's one aspect of it. The Rambam says, right, that there's another thing, shinui reshus, meaning the very fact that this bull that gored 3 times, if he goes to another owner, that can, so to speak, reset the animal. He no longer has that status of one who always gores. Because things can change when there's a different person working with the animal. Where there's, for whatever reason, the animal may have had an animosity to the owner or to the way it was treated or something like this. The new owner starts off with a clean slate. So I was just told, Shimon Spitzer, he's a friend of mine and also a great speaker, mostly in Yiddish. So he told this story that he just heard the other week. There were parents who's, had the experience that's not uncommon of a kid's school suggesting that, he's such a bracha, they should give that bracha to another school next year. So, so anyway, they went around searching for who was going to receive that bracha. And so they heard about a school really had a very good record and supposed to have excellent educators. And, they really tried to get him in, and he was accepted. And they were delighted. And, in his grade, there was a Rebbe, there was a Mechanech who was known to be a master educator. A real, someone that really affected kids wonderfully. And then comes the first day of school, and they discover that grade, they have now 2 sections, and their kid was put in with a total rookie. So in the first year he's teaching. And, as the weeks went on, they got the feeling that he's not learning very much. But they took him after a while for an evaluation, right? He was evaluated before, he was getting evaluated now. And the person who did the evaluation said he's doing wonderfully. But the father says, I try to ask him things about what he's learning. He doesn't know anything. He says, that doesn't matter. He says, he tells me that his Rebbe is very kind. He's very kind and he's very calm. And he says, that's what he needs now more than getting pumped full of information. That can come. He says, he got what he needed with this one, even if the other one was a master educator and this one was a newcomer, but that was the right connection. So it's important, right, for a person to realize sometimes how that one thing that you do, the equivalent of the children patting the ox, it can be a compliment, it can be noticing someone, it can be doing something, can diffuse anger, can diffuse sense inside the person of poor self-esteem that leads to anger and such. There was a beautiful story about Rav Nosson Kamenetsky Zatzal. He lived in Mattersdorf, and I remember after he passed away, so I heard a man speak. He was a Balkori in the shul that Rav Nosson davened in, and he said he was a very good Balkori, but occasionally Rav Nosson was a master of diktuk and all these things, occasionally corrected him. So he said every week that Rav Nosson corrected him, Rav Nosson stopped by his house on his way home from shul to tell his wife, how wonderfully your husband read today. Dafka on those weeks, on the ones when he corrected him. So that is, that's a picture. Now, this ties into the upcoming Purim very much. Okay, Purim, on one hand, the person thinks, why should it be such a transformative day? It's one day, right? We're running around, usually very busy, trying to do 10 things at once. And there are different things. You send some money to the poor, and you send mishloach manos to people. But it's supposed to really be achieving something very important, right? Those small actions of sending a gift to someone is supposed to bring people closer. Now, I mentioned, I've heard this from people, that it's true. There is an idea, mishloach manos ish l're'ehu, send to your friends. There's an idea of increasing reus and oneness. But look for other people also that aren't getting shalach manos, Or even if you have some neighbor that doesn't always look at you with the greatest eye or something like this, and to surprise them with it, that gift, right, can bring about a shift. Right? As long as your kavanah is the right thing, as your kavanah is, I want to be closer. I don't want these divisions. I don't want these separations. The Maral, in talking about, he goes at length about the idea of Mishloach Manos in his Sefer Or Chodesh, and he says that we are supposed to be one. Amalek are dividers. Right? Haman said, Yeshno Am Echod, Befuzor Mefurad Bein Ha'amim. Right? That they are one nation, but they've been scattered. That they are divided. So what we're doing is trying to bring about togetherness. So obviously, Evyonim, a poor person, oftentimes feels that those around him don't see him, don't understand his situation, aren't caring about him, right? And this is where the word tzedakah, the Maharal brings down a beautiful thing. He says the word tzedakah has letters that are brothers. What's that mean? He says you have the tzadi and the kuf. They come next to each other in the aleph beis. And you have the dalet and the hey. They're next to each other in the aleph beis. So he says when you give tzedakah, it gives the person a feeling that he has a brother. He has someone there who's with him and taking care of him. The idea of Mishloach Manos, right, is even to add more. Chazal say even if you give a gift to a child, you give a cookie to a child, you should put a little note or something so his mother knows you gave him a cookie, because that will add more love in Am Yisrael. People will know and appreciate it. So I'll finish with a story about the Pnei Menachem. That was the previous Ger Rebbe, Rav Pinchas Menachem Alter. It's a long story. That's what I said. Yeah, I think we get. So again, it was told by the Tolna Rebbe, who was a close Talmud of his, and he said that the Ger Rebbe, like in many big communities, so they would send out official Mishloach Manos from the Rebbe to different people. Oftentimes people were supporters and donors of the community, etc. And he said he helped arrange that list. And soon after Purim, the Rebbe went to visit one of the people who was on the list, a wealthy man who lived in Tel Aviv. The Rebbe had to be in Tel Aviv for something, he wanted to talk to the man. So he came into the house. I believe the Tolna Rebbe was with him also, a few Hasidim. And the man kind of yelled out in a very chutzpahdik way. He said, Rebbe, you sent me Mishloach Manos? He said, yes, I did. I believe so. He says, why did you send me Mishloach Manos? It says, Mishloach Manos ish l're'ehu. You send to your friend, to your fellow man. Would you want to live next to me here in Tel Aviv? Would you want to send your kids to the same school I send my kids? Would you want to go on vacation with me where I go on vacation? We're not friends. So the Hasidim already were getting worked up. But the Rebbe he said, tell me, he said, was there chocolate in the Mishloach Manos? He said, I think so. He says, but you didn't eat it. He said, how do you know? He says, because I know your blood sugar is problematic. You didn't eat it. But do you love chocolate? He said, I do. He said, it's the same thing with me. He said, I was entrusted with a way of life by my father, my grandfather, etc. And I'm trying to bring up my family, my Talmidim, my Hasidim in that way. If I would do those things that you said with you, so then they wouldn't be able to hold on to that way of education I'm trying to do. But it doesn't mean I don't love you. I love you very much. Okay, so that's the idea. It's supposed to be able to transmit that. It doesn't mean that it erases all differences, but it's supposed to bridge that gap and say, even if we are different, I still love you, right? And there's this idea of the brothers, just like the brother letters of tzedakah, and with Mishloach Manos even more. So people should have this in mind as the tachlis of Mishloach Manos. It's gotten crazy and out of hand. I remember hearing Revival Cohen that's speaking in Brooklyn many years ago. He said, what happened to Mishloach Manos? He says, when I was a kid, you would take a paper plate, you would put on there a little box of raisins and some potato chips and a kind of crumbly hamantashen. If you're real fancy, you fold the paper plate into a triangle, so it's like a hamantashen. With a marker, you write on it from the Cohens, and you wrap it in plastic, and you send those around, and people send those around. You take out something from this one, something from that one, etc. Now it's become a thing that you see the advertisements months before. How will yours be unique? And part of the idea of unique means better than someone else's. So people live in tension, right? Somebody comes and, he says, oh no, the Greenbergs sent this Japanese guy over and he's making sushi in our living room. So quick, we have to go make a barbecue in his backyard or something like this. It becomes the one-upmanship, and we forget the basic message that's supposed to be transmitted. And that's why I saw brought down in the halacha that really the person, if you to be Yotzei Mishloach Manos, the person has to know who gave it, right? Because otherwise, the point doesn't happen, right? Tzedakah can be done anonymously, but here it's supposed to give that connection. It's supposed to give that scent. It's, so to speak, all of us are a raging bull in one way or another at different times. So here it's like those children patting the bull. It's something which shows that care and love and attention value, which hopefully will bring the achdus.